What's going on, everybody? My name is Tony Gladney, and I have the absolute pleasure of being your host for this podcast here, but more importantly, of being able to bring this labor of love here that is the inaugural Delta Flows podcast to you all today. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas, and its ecosystem is of national importance. Delta Flows is a new podcast from Restore the Delta that examines the future of the Delta as a region. We'll be looking at how state and federal policies impact estuary health and the health of the 4 million residents who live here in the Delta counties. We'll be discussing local efforts around restoration, climate work, agriculture, and carbon and energy management. We'll be discussing art, cultural events, and yes, the Delta does have its own very unique culture, both rural and urban, which we'll be learning more about. And we'll be learning from and listening to representatives from California tribes with deep ties to the Delta on their aspirations for the Delta's future. The podcast pays homage to the Indigenous peoples and land on which this very recording and Delta events take place. The land on which we have gathered has been home to the Miwok and Yokut peoples, as well as other groups that have gathered, traveled, and engaged with this land. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is a traditional cultural landscape for many of the tribes in the California Central Valley. We acknowledge the unceded territories and history of dispossession. We hope and support the respect of tribal sovereignty, tribal knowledge, and the rights for all peoples in this unique place. Our podcast will feature guests from Restore the Delta team and from dozens of affiliated organizations with varying specializations and representatives from government agencies. Our podcast will include community and youth voices. It will feature PhD scientists, farmers, fishing experts, and lawyers. We got them all, y'all. It will open space for sovereign tribal leaders whose ties to the Delta have existed since time immemorial. Today's very, very special guest is Gary Mulcahy. Gary is the government liaison and a member of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. He's worked 40 years in California water, representing the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, advancing work on the restoration of non-federally listed tribes to federal roles and the restoration of tribal water rights here in California. Gary, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you here as our very first guest. It was almost like we couldn't start with anybody else, and I'm so excited to be here and just learn from you today and just chat with you. So please, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you. And thank you, Restore the Delta, for asking me here. I'm currently, as he said, I'm the government liaison for the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. And the Winnemem-Wintu tribe is also a partner with Restore the Delta, Shingle Springs Band of Miwok, Buena Vista Rancheria, Little Manila Rising, and DTEC, which is Delta Tribal Environmental Coalition. And we're all working to get things done for the Delta and to get the state to actually do something with their Bay Delta Plan water quality update. So I'm not quite sure what they want me to talk about today, so I'll just start off by saying I'm going to talk to you about tribal water rights, and I'm going to talk to you about murder, mayhem, and genocide.
Yeah.
Many of you people don't realize that when you turn your water faucet on, you think that, well, that just is natural, and it comes to us, and the agencies that bring me the water, and I pay my little water bill and all that stuff. But you don't know where that water originated. Where that water originated was back when California was becoming a state, back in the 1849s, 1850s, right in there. You had miners that were going out, and they found gold in California, and the gold that they found was up in tributaries of rivers and streams all over the place. And in order to lay their claim to gold, they also laid their claim to water because they used water in their sloughs and even some placer mining and stuff like that. But to claim that, to take possession of that, they would put a note on a tree that said, "This is mine." And somewhere in the law, California adopted the first in time, first in right policy, which was based on that appropriation. They recognized that those miners were the first ones to claim that water. They didn't care who was there first. They didn't care the tribes that were there, the tribes that had been there for thousands of years, like my tribe up on the McCloud River, Sacramento River, Pitt River, Sacramento, up and down the Sacramento River all the way down to the bay. They didn't care about us. What they did care about was we were there. And what they cared about us being there is they sent in militias sanctioned by the state of California to go in and kill Native American people. And how I can tell you this was sanctioned by the state of California, because they authorized a $5 bounty for scalps of Indian people. So we had militias that would go in Winnemem Territory, Pitt River Territory, Paiute Territory, on the East Choctaw, you name it. Name a California tribe up and down the state, and you'll know that they were sought out, either shot, killed, murdered one way or the other, or enslaved and put in some missionary thing. So when you think about your water, think about the blood that was spilled in order to give you that water, because that water came from the indigenous people that were here that took care of it for generations and generations. And I had a whole family. My great-great-grandmother, her nieces and nephews that were over on the Trinity, were slaughtered at the Rainbow Bridge slaughter, or I forget the other name they used for it, in Trinity County. It was because there was water and there was gold available on that Trinity, and they lost their lives for it. And those are my ancestors. And yes, I think about those things now and then, and people come up to me and say, hey, that was in the past. I didn't have anything to do with that. That was, you got to forget about that. Just forget about that. Do you forget about 9/11? Do you forget about Pearl Harbor? Do you forget about the Holocaust? You don't just forget about that. Well, those are the things that happened to our people. Those are our Holocaust. Those were our 9/11.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'll shut up there.
No. I think that's so important, Gary. And I actually appreciate you for bringing that perspective, especially when you said, there's a few things I want to hit on, but when you mentioned about just forgetting, right? And I think in a lot of ways, in some spaces too, what I'm hopeful for is that even listeners of this podcast, even that they're learning for the first time too, in some cases. But I wanted to go back, because in the beginning you mentioned some other organizations that you're working with, like Chingle Springs and Buena Vista Rancheria, Little Manila Rising, Delta, Restore the Delta. And you mentioned like water rights and some of the efforts you guys are doing. So can you just explain to our listeners, what are water rights? Just so you can so they know what that is, so they can keep up with the language. And then what are the efforts you guys are doing as it relates to water rights?
Well, then in California, there's different flavors of water rights. You have riparian water rights, which are water rights that are attached to land. If a piece of land is sitting next to a water, a stream, or something flowing by, there's inherent rights to the water that is there. So it's a riparian right, and you can't take that away. It stays with the land, but it doesn't go anywhere else. Then you have appropriative rights, and appropriative rights are assigned by the state, either through this thing that I told you about, first in time, first in right. They approved water rights for pre-1914 settlement contractors, and those are what are called senior water rights. And then you have junior water rights, which came after 1914. Those are appropriative water rights. And those are permits that are water rights that are granted by the state of California through the State Water Resources Control Board. Then you also have groundwater rights, which are water rights underneath the land that you own. The problem with those water rights, as far as indigenous communities go, Native Americans, as far as disadvantaged communities go, people of color, environmental justice communities, Asian communities, immigrant communities, we didn't own land because they took our land. Or if we went to try and purchase land, they would redline us and not let us do it because you weren't the right color.
Right.
You weren't white. You weren't male, you weren't all of these things, so you didn't qualify for land ownership. So you didn't qualify for riparian rights because you couldn't get the land with the water next to it.
Yeah.
You didn't qualify for groundwater rights because you couldn't get the land for the right to the water underneath it.
Yeah.
And since you weren't a landowner or a big ag person, you didn't get appropriative rights where they assigned you some specific water rights that you were allocated out of the watershed system, whether it was a Sacramento or San Joaquin watershed system.
I was doing some reading in preparation for this, and you mentioned around like you guys weren't able to get land, or they took that land away from you. And I want to just, hopefully you can help me connect the dots. So I was doing some reading around like California Lands Claim Act in 1851 and how they weren't able to like claim their land because they were away. Is that similar to what you were talking about with not able to have land or not able to acquire land as people of color and tribal people?
Well, yes and no. In 1851 to 1852, as far as tribes are concerned, I can't speak to other communities, but as far as tribes are concerned, there were 18 treaties that were signed, guaranteeing all of these tribes in California the right to a reservation, and the reservation would have came with reserved water rights and reserved rights, federally reserved water rights, but the California legislature, the California government, lobbied the U.S. Congress not to ratify those treaties. Stanford and those folks back then said, we can't lose access to all of these resources. If we give these guys a reservation, we're going to lose this much resource here, that much resource there, because there was 25-mile square reservations here, 35-mile square reservations there that were all talked about in these treaties. So they lobbied Washington to not ratify the treaties, so they didn't. They hid the treaties away for 50 years. But even though the treaties weren't ratified, the state of California and the federal government started taking ownership of all of the land, considering it as ceded land, even though the treaties weren't ratified. So we lost land because the state sent in settlers and miners and industry into our territory to take the land away from us. So we didn't actually have the land in order to call our own because it had been taken away. And that happened to tribes all up and down the state. Some tribes received reservations, but that's another story. But the majority of the tribes did not receive reservations.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. And fast forwarding to like almost like a century later, around like 1945, to that point, and around that time, the Shasta Dam was completed, right? And the reason why I bring that up and I fast forward and I use that time is because the fight continued. But again, even 100 years later, Shasta Dam, it was completed in 1945 as part of the Central Valley Project. Is that right?
Correct.
So, and that Shasta Dam, it flooded over 90% of the Winnemucwa's land. That's correct?
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
In 1937, the legislation went into effect, or they were discussing legislation called the Indian Lands Acquisition Act, and for other purposes. It went through the legislature and got signed into law in 1941, Public Law 198. And what this legislation said was this was to make way for Shasta Dam and for Friant Dam, by the way,
Okay.
Because those were the two dams that were being built at the time. What this said was that the federal government took ownership of all lands, Indian lands within the CVP project area that, in other words, took ownership of all of them. And they were supposed to pay just compensation for the lands to the tribes that were there. They were supposed to provide like lands, and they were supposed to provide a cemetery for all of the burials that were or family cemeteries that were going to have to be disinterred and then reinterred somewhere else, and put it in a cemetery and trust for the tribes or the family, as the case may be. But what happened was the tribal members that still lived on the river, there was houses still on the river because they didn't run us all off. There used to be a fish hatchery on the McCloud River called Baird Fish Hatchery. And many of the women who lived and worked there, they still had housing around that area before the dam was built. But during the time the dam was being built, World War II happened. And many of our elders, our grandparents and great uncles and those, went to fight for the United States, went to fight in war in World War II.
Yeah.
While they were over there fighting for this country in order to be sure that we made it free, Hitler didn't get away with it, and the emperor didn't get away with it. BOR came in and bulldozed our houses down.
Wow.
Because they needed to build Shasta Dam and needed to clean the area for the water when it came in and flowed. So Shasta Dam was completed in 1945, and you can imagine the look on your ancestors' face when they came home to find out that their homes were now 700 feet underwater.
Wow.
And no place else to go because no other home was provided for them. So that's what happened to the Winnemem back then with the Central Valley Project. And we've been fighting, of course, Shasta Dam ever since then. They've one of the big things, other than cutting the Winnemem off from their historical traditional lands, they also cut the salmon off. Because when they built the dam, now the salmon had no way to get back to the historical spawning grounds up in the McCloud River, the upper McCloud River, and the upper Sacramento River, the upper Pitt River. And the Barrett hatchery that I mentioned before was built by Livingston Stone back in the 1800s, 1870s and there. And he had sent a report to the U.S. Fish Commission about one day in July in 1871 where he counted 200,000 salmon coming up the river. Wow. So many salmon came up the river that they couldn't capture them in the weirs in order to get the eggs for the spawning for the hatchery. They had to let them all go. They had already gone past. So that was the vitality of the salmon runs back then in the 1800s. By 1963, when I was just out of school, I wasn't out of school. I was like in 8th grade, but I'm not that old.
You were enrolled.
I was enrolled. We used to go down to the river, Sacramento River, down at McKinley Park, and we would fish for salmon down there when I was a kid. And the salmon still in 63 was still black enough on the winter runs and the spring runs that it looked like you could almost walk across the river.
Yeah.
Because the salmon were so thick. 7 years later, in 1970, you go out there and you could barely see a salmon coming up through the jumps. They were still there. You know, you could still go out and snag one if you were smart enough, but they had just about gone. You can go now to the park, Lake Redding Park, sit down at the salmon viewing area, and you can sit there for hours and hours and hours during the salmon run and not see a single salmon.
Wow.
Not one. And that's because they're on the verge of extinction.
Right, and there you said there was once 200,000?
In one day.
In one day. Wow. Just take a moment to sit with that. Wow. So I want to turn corners a little bit because you mentioned, I know we've been talking about the water rights and stuff like that, but I want to, because you mentioned the word watershed. And if you wanted, can you just tell us a little bit about the Winnemem Wintu people and explain how you all are connected to the Delta watershed? And if you could just give a little bit of explanation between the difference between the legal Delta and the Delta watershed.
Well, the legal Delta is what the government people want you to figure out is the legal Delta, which would be San Francisco Bay, part of Stockton, part of Sassoon, and that's the legal Delta. I mean, according to them.
Yeah.
All right. The Delta, to us, goes all the way up, almost to Red Bluff, all the way down to past Modesto Merced. Wow. I mean, and would actually include Sacramento and everything else. That is the historic Delta that we remember, or the tribes remember, back before there was all the dams and all this filling in and trying to build infrastructure. because that was the normal delta that during the flooding season, the waters would come down, the delta would open up, the floodplains would flood, the water would spread out. You'd come down for your, off of the mountains or out of the valleys, down to the marshes, and there you'd get your salmon or whatever they'd be in there, and that's the real delta, not the legal delta. I know Barbara could probably explain it better. She explains the delta better than I, but that's our view of the legal delta. And the real delta, the real delta is huge. Yeah. I mean, is a vibrant living thing, or was a vibrant living thing before it got plumbed to almost extinction itself.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gary, for just this history that you've given me and even some of the work you guys are currently doing. We're going to take a break right now, just to give us a break, because we know that's a lot to digest. And we're actually going to welcome up Barbara for a public service announcement for a little bit of break, and then we'll come back to just wrap up our conversation. Sounds good?
Sure. Do you have a Kit Kat?
We'll get you a Kit Kat.
Well, then we can have a break.
Alrighty, y'all, let's get back into it. We are here with none other than the fearless leader of Restore the Delta that you all know by now, Barbara Bergan-Parilla. And Barbara is here to talk about our PSAs. At this time of our segment of the podcast, we'll go through PSAs, but today in particular, since it's our inaugural one, we want to talk about the Delta Tunnel processes. So, of course, none other than Barbara. Tell us about the Delta Tunnel. What's going on with that?
Well, unfortunately, the Delta, they call it the Delta Conveyance Project now, but we all call it the tunnel, is back before us with the State Water Resources Control Board. We are at the beginning of a long process where we have to prepare testimony, and we have to work to stop the Water Board, the State Water Resources Control Board, from permitting the tunnel to move forward. And that will go on for a couple of years. We had a very temporary minor win this last week in the fact that we are pushing back how these hearings should move forward presently. It's a real burden on communities, and it's a real burden on tribes. And right now, the government has so many processes to try to replumb California water once again to the detriment of the Delta that we're just completely overburdened. We are in legal processes for the tunnel. Our colleagues are in legal processes around Sites Reservoir, another problematic project. And the biggest problem is they still haven't finished the Bay Delta Plan, which is this incredibly complex plan that is supposed to be done every 3 years under the Clean Water Act to set the proper water quality and flow standards for the Delta. California hasn't updated it in 30 years. And so our colleagues, that Gary talked about that are part of DTEC, this Delta Tribal Environmental Coalition, with the help first of Stanford and now the Yale Environmental Law Clinic, we filed 2 petitions with US EPA. They're administrative legal petitions. One is a Title VI civil rights complaint, and the other is a petition for rulemaking saying, hey, EPA, get the state to do its job that it hasn't done for 30 years and enforce the Clean Water Act. So we just finished an informal resolution, confidential process with EPA and the Water Board, and documents are being worked on that. And, our ultimate goal is that we want to see this Bay Delta Plan finished and a whole nother difficult process called, quote unquote, voluntary agreements stopped. And those shenanigans are all centered around water districts making decisions in closed door processes, aided by the Water Board, to decide who's going to get how much water through the Delta, rather than using really good science to protect those fisheries and tribal beneficial uses and farm uses of water in the Delta and the fisheries, so that the people who live in the estuary can actually protect their economy, their livelihood, and their culture.
Wow. Wow, thank you for sharing that. I have a question for the folks that are listening here, and this sparks something for them, right? Where could they go, or is it even possible to like learn more, or even support this work? What can we do?
You know, visit our website. We have regular updates, and if you're on our newsletter, which kind of delves into these processes in more detail than you can in a podcast, that's one way to keep track of it. You know, and it's a pretty good resource. So we point people to other resources as well. I think the important thing for people to understand about the Delta Tunnel is not to panic. The Water Board has to finish. There's an environmental impact report that has to come from the Army Corps of Engineers still. The Delta Stewardship Council has to have their process to approve it. There's going to have to be a water quality certification from US EPA if they move forward. And they have a lot of hoops to jump through, and they don't even have water districts committed to pay for it yet. I think the saddest thing for us at Restore the Delta is we work in a lot of other areas. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be doing this. We actually collaborate pretty well with government. We want to be working on sustainable ag and land water restoration and a green economy and working on how are we going to prepare ourselves for climate change. We have all these young advocates, and it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. And with climate change, it's not going to work. $20 billion is a lot of money to waste on a problematic project. Right. So I think that's the sad part, but you know, our job is to make sure the estuary gets restored. Yeah. And so we work to stop the bad stuff while we work to promote the good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're doing a darn good job at it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for just being the fearless leader that you are and leading this work and bringing this information to us. So,
and I'm looking forward to future podcasts. It won't be me. You know, part of the work that we're doing right now is making sure that the next generation is ready to lead. We're just kicking off a little bit with the elders today so that we can do some modeling and get people set up to take this effort forward with you.
You got that right. We can't do it without the elders. You guys are laying the foundation, blazing the trail for us, and we're happy to take it up. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Let us prepare for our next segment, getting ready to hear from Tama Brisbane with our words and our youth.
Okay, so hi, welcome back to Delta Flows, and this is the part of the program that you did not expect. This is With Our Words. I'm Tama Brisbane, Executive Director, Stockton Poet Laureate Emerita, and I am here with a special guest and rotating host, Miss Manaya Joy. Say hi, Manaya.
Hi.
So this section is devoted to youth voice, activating youth voice inside of the areas of air, water, land, environmental justice, all of the places inside of being a citizen of the Delta where we're not paying attention to young people's voices, but we will hear.
So on that same note, I would like to say we need to adjust when and where we decide to use the term activating youth voice.
Activating, okay, because...
Well, on one hand, it implies that they're not active when we've seen in the past few years that, yes, they are. Yes, they are talking about these issues. Yes, they know what's going on. Yes, they are aware of how they're affecting them, how these issues are affecting the youth. It's just the adults and the higher-ups that aren't listening to them. So in that sense, we should shy away from the term activating youth voice.
Duly noted, because With Our Words has done this kind of work for a couple of decades now in bringing young people to mics like these and platforms like this and giving them permission to say and narrate their story and their point of view inside of issues like this in whatever language the hell they choose, yes?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So what we will be doing is spotlighting different subjects, different, what is it I'm looking for? Different activities that young people are involved in, different conversations that they are being kept out of and they do belong in. So you'll see people on campus doing climate change activities, people off campus organizing projects that benefit or lift up areas inside of Stockton that aren't being paid attention to. And maybe we don't know the language, maybe we don't have the questions, like when we say HABs, H-A-B-S. Well, you and I already know that means harmful algal blooms.
Yes.
But maybe everybody doesn't know.
No, absolutely. Or we might know what RSV means. Not everybody knows what RSV is.
Yeah, that's true.
And for those of you that don't know, RSV is the precursor to asthma, which is something that we deal with a lot in the Central Valley. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it does. It does. Because the population of Stockton is 45% under the age of 35, this segment that we're doing right here is going to be of primary importance, because that young voice doesn't have next. That young voice has right now. And the impact that they stand to have from this election season going forward is huge. You've already had experience using your voice outside of Stockton, inside of places where votes are being taken to impact the environmental community and communities of color.
Oh, absolutely.
What was that like?
Honestly, at first it was a little nerve-wracking, because I mean, it's the prep part of it, because you have to read through all these documents. You have to understand, okay, this is what's being talked about. This is what these numbers mean. This is how it's going to affect you. Then it is now my job to translate that in language that makes sense to us, because I'm pretty sure that not everybody can read a sheet of statistics on how many algal blooms were present in the last few years, or what's in the air and why it's affecting us, or how the air quality has rapidly declined. We can't just understand that off the top of our heads. So there's the prep work, but then getting into those spaces and having to speak and having to essentially tell the people in power, what you're doing isn't cool and here's why. It's terrifying. It's actually kind of terrifying.
So I think that's one of the things that this segment will do, is be able to surface questions, because we're not going to have all the answers, but we damn sure know how to ask questions.
We do.
And be able to demystify some of the language, some of the statistics, and make it real for young people.
And make it accessible. Because it's not that it's not out there, it's just that it's not always easy to break it down in a way that people understand.
Yeah.
Or then when it is out there, it's, okay, well now I have to navigate this labyrinth of a website to understand what the hell this means. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So you won't always see me in this chair. The host will rotate. The guests will rotate. The subject matter will, even the music is going to rotate. The theme music that you heard coming into our segment, we're building a library of music that will maybe fit the flow, fit the theme of each month. And so be prepared for a different look. Delta Flows is literally going to do that. It is going to flow.
Oh no, this is me agreeing with you.
What about the literacy part?
In terms of?
Eco-literacy, artistry, how we surface youth voice. We're not going to say activate.
Yes, thank you.
Can we say surface?
We can say surface. That's fine.
Say surface. Okay. So how we surface young voice, and how we elevate it, and how we make it louder. A little too quiet out there. And not necessarily the fault of young people, more so the fault of adults who really aren't checking for you. We are.
Yeah. You know, I would say that in terms of eco-literacy, what I could speak to in terms of With Our Words is the work that With Our Words has done in terms of turning some of these statistics into stanzas. Aha, see what I did there?
Statistics into stanzas.
Into stanzas. You know, we'd actually used to do, correct me if I'm wrong, we rock green mics years and years ago. Yeah. And that was solely focused on green poetry, as we called it. The umbrella term was green poetry, but a lot of that would focus on talking about the air quality, or talking about the Delta, or talking about something else that was going on. I remember we worked on a piece in recent years, because wasn't there something being put out in a city hall about the removal of a bunch of trees in Stockton. Do you remember that?
There was.
There were a bunch. You would drive around certain neighborhoods and you would see these orange X's on trees, and they were like slated for removal or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were about to write a whole piece talking about why would you get rid of trees that are helping produce cleaner air when the air in Stockton is already so bad?
Yeah.
Am I making sense here?
You're making sense.
Cool.
So you get an idea. It's going to span a wide range of subjects and art forms and opinions. You'll get into a debate. Like, feel free to check us, just like she checks me. And we're looking forward to spotlighting young people, young voice inside of Delta Flows. And now we're going to turn it back over to Tony Gladney and his special guest, Gary Mulcahy.
Well, and we are back here with Gary Mulcahy here to just finish up our conversation. I know there's a few things that we want to just put a bow on and talk about the future of the work, and hope you all enjoyed listening to the PSAs and our youth with our words, and such powerful voices here in the community. We just give them the space, let them take up their space. So Gary, I know we were talking about water rights and stuff like that, but I really wanted to just ask you one specific question, just share with us and the listeners, what really needs to happen to tribal water rights for them to be restored for the California tribes here?
Well, that's a deep question, a bad question, because what needs to happen, a lot of the old guard doesn't want to happen, and what that is water rights system in California needs to change. Period. No doubt about it. This pre-1914 senior water rights people that went out and put a note on a tree and said, "This is mine," back before 1914, have priority over everybody else when it comes to water. And then anybody after that as junior water rights to them needs to change. And since the tribes were excluded from having their water rights allocated to them in the beginning because, we were massacred. Mm-hmm. So, dead people who don't need water, I guess. Mm-hmm. I guess that's the way they figured. The water rights system just needs to change. Under federal law, there are 106 federally recognized tribes in the state of California. There's 80 plus non-federally listed tribes. And what I mean by non-federally listed is they're not listed on the list of tribes that the government says are our tribes. But out of those 106 federally listed tribes, only 4, I believe, it might be less than that, I think it's 3 tribes, have had their federal reserved tribal water rights adjudicated, which means when a reservation is made, when a tribe is recognized, it comes with inherent rights, and that's under Winter's, I got the quote here somewhere, Winter's doctrine from way back in the 1800s, and that tribes who have reservations assigned to them have inherent water rights, tribal water rights assigned to those that cannot be taken away. And they cannot be usurped in any way by state or the federal government, without some kind of compensation. And in California, out of the 106 federally listed tribes that I told about, I believe only 3 really have had their water rights adjudicated. And what that means is that the State Water Resources Control Board is issuing water permits for people, water rights for people, without even addressing where the tribal water rights are, so they don't know if there's unallocated water there or not. They're giving away water rights that they don't have any right to give away. And so that needs to change.
Well, Gary, you mentioned something also about the federally listed tribes.
Right.
And that was one of the first notes I took when I started to just do research here. And I actually wanted to highlight that. And I failed to do it sooner. But Winnemucca tribe is not a federally listed tribe. Correct? But it's recognized as a tribe by federal government in ongoing co-management projects.
Correct.
What does that mean, and why is that federal listing so critical to the tribes?
Well, the federal listing provides the tribes with health care, Indian health services, Indian child care protection, education benefits, and self-governance ability and money, basically income, an economic base in order so the tribe can be self-sustained or self-sufficient. So that's what the federally listing thing helps with. It also helps with this. Most agencies won't talk to you. A federal agency won't talk to you if you're not a federally listed tribe. Oh, you're not federally listed, so you're not an Indian tribe.
Wow.
But we won't talk to you. And that goes for all of them. That goes for BOR, BIA, Department of Commerce, EPA, all of them things. If you're not a federally listed tribe, they normally won't engage with you whatsoever. You don't qualify for any of their programs. They have grant programs for like economic restoration or environmental restoration or fish restoration. If you're not a federally listed tribe, you can't apply for those because you're not Indian, according to them, because you're not on their list. That's what it means.
Wow. So your tribe's just supposed to go without those things or make your way?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're supposed to go without that. And have you ever seen that meme, with a little mouse is standing on the hill and there's a hawk swooping in to get it, and he's making a hand gesture at the hawk as he comes in?
I don't think so, but I can visualize what
you
you're
can
talking
visualize
about.
it,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm
Well,
looking
that's
at it
us.
right now. Close your eyes. Okay.
Well, that's us because they've been treating us like that little mouse that they're going to come in and swoop away.
Wow.
And we've made our hand gesture at them now for, 150 years, and more so in the last 30 years because of the possibility of Shasta Dam being raised,
Right.
which would flood the rest of our territory, and the salmon getting ready to go extinct because the numbers are so low. I mean, the winter run salmon, the salmon in the Winnemem-Wintu are synonymous. Whatever happens to the salmon happens to the Winnemem. In our creation story, when we came out of the mountain, we were the last spirit to come out of the mountain, and we took the human form. All the other spirits had come out already. Deer had come out, bear had come out, eagle had come out, hummingbird had come out, ladybug had come out. All of these spirits had come out. We were the last to come out, and we decided, okay, we're going to be human. But all the spirits looked at us, and grandfather looked at us and says, man, they're going to need a lot of help because we were pretty pitiful and pretty weak. Salmon came up and said, we are going to give you our voice so that you can speak with the spirits and speak with our brothers, and so that you can learn. And in return, we ask you to always speak for us. And so since that time, our creation, we have always spoke for the salmon. Wow. And the salmon has taken care of us. They were our sustenance through summer, winter, spring, and fall, back before the dams came in. The winter run would come up, we would get enough food almost to last us all year. The spring run would come up, we'd get enough food to last us for the rest of the year. And so the salmon and the Winnemem-Wintu people are synonymous. Songs, religious practices, prayers, all those things are tied, the Winnemem and the salmon. And since the salmon are endangered, the Winnemem are endangered. Since the Delta is endangered, the salmon are endangered. The salmon are endangered, the Winnemem are endangered. That's why we are working to save the Delta, working to save the ecosystem, because it's necessary for the continuation of not only the salmon, not only the Winnemem, but all life up and down the Sacramento watershed, because the salmon are the canary in the coal mine. Yeah. They really are. And look, 7 years trolling, they haven't found a Delta smelt now. So what does that tell you?
Wow.
The Delta's in trouble, and we're here to try and fight and help.
Wow. I think there's no better segue to just my final question, especially because you mentioned all about the salmon and how it's synonymous with the people. What are your hopes for the Winnemem tribe, for Winnemem-Wintu, for California tribes, and for Delta peoples, particularly in terms of salmon and water?
Well, my hope for the tribe is that we get federally listed. And because if we get federally listed, we're going to be able to put some land into trust for us, which means it's not taxable, it's ours. Yeah. We have sovereign nation, again, our own territory. And on that territory, we're going to put our own fishery so that we can do a hatchery for salmon, and that's going to be on the McCloud River. Hopefully that's a Balibaka, which is a historical Winnemem-Wintu site. So that is the hope for the tribe itself, and that would help bring the salmon back. We want to bring the salmon back. We want to ensure that they don't go extinct. We want to get a volitional passage so they can do their natural life cycle, swim up to their traditional habitat so that they can spawn in their traditional spawning grounds in the ice cold water, because that's what the winter run needs, is the ice cold water, the glacial water, not the regular water in the Sacramento. They can spawn there. They can hang out there. The little ones grow and then swim out to the ocean and thrive out there and come back for the natural life cycle. Swim up, swim back, the natural life cycle. And what we would like to see for the tribes, all the rest of the tribes in water in California, is the fact that water rights need to be addressed not only for the tribes, but they need to be addressed for all of the other people that were disadvantaged, all the other people that were disgraced and downtrodden and robbed out of the ability to own land, to own property, to own anything that would give them a means to sustain themselves, a means to move themselves forward because of the land grab and the water grab that happened in the 1800s and early 1900s. I'd like to see that taken care of. I'd like to see the State Water Resources Control Board throw out the current water rights system and implement a new one that is more just and more equitable to all of California, not just ag and big water agencies.
I lied. I have one last question, because we have listeners here from all around. What can they do if they want to support this work? They want to get involved in this work, again, because this conversation really sparked them or revealed things that they may not have known. What can the listener do to be engaged in this?
Well, I'm not sure what you could do to help the Winnemem, because our WinnememWin2.us website kind of got hacked and smacked. So you can't go there. But what you can do is you can go to Restore the Delta, because Restore the Delta and the WinnememWin2 and the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok and Buena Vista Rancheria and Little Manila Rising, we're all partners in this fight to ensure that the Delta is protected, that the Delta is restored, that water rights are addressed, that people of color, disadvantaged communities, and tribal nations find some redress and equity for once and for all in the system of California water and California politics. So go to RTD.
Gary, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Folks, you all have just heard it here. This is just a snippet. There's so much more of just Gary's work in Restore the Delta. Don't forget to visit restorethedelta.org to just learn more how you can get involved. But again, please, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Gary, for joining us here. Again, Gary is a government liaison and member of the WinnememWin2 tribe. We're super excited to have him here, bringing us the inaugural episode of the Delta Flows podcast. We're so excited to be back with you guys in about 3 weeks. We'll be having a special guest, Dr. Caleb Scoville, to discuss how the existence of a tiny fish became a national disinformation campaign. My name is Tony. I have the pleasure of being your host, and I'll see you guys next time.
And I accept your nomination. Thank you.